Hunter didn't expect to find a lost dog in the middle of the pouring rain, but there it was soaking wet, shivering, and staring up at him with the saddest brown eyes he had ever seen. "Where did you come from, buddy?" he muttered, crouching down as the golden retriever hesitated, then took a cautious step toward him. Its fur was matted with mud and it looked like it had been wandering for a while. No collar, no tags. Just lost. With a sigh, Hunter glanced around the empty street. The storm had turned the sidewalks into rivers, the streetlights casting a hazy glow over everything. There was no way he was leaving the dog out here. "All right, let's get you somewhere warm," he said, reaching out his hand. The dog hesitated for a second before pressing its nose into his palm, trusting him instantly. Hunter took that as a yes. An hour later, Hunter sat on the floor of his apartment, a towel draped over his lap as he dried the retriever off. The dog had inhaled the bowl of food he set down and was now curled up against his side like they had known each other forever. "You're lucky I have a soft spot for strays," Hunter murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "But someone's probably worried sick about you." He leaned back against the couch, running a hand through his damp hair. It had been a long day at work, and this wasn't how he planned to spend his night, but there was something about the dog's quiet presence that made the exhaustion a little easier. Tomorrow he'd check for a microchip and put up some flyers. But for tonight, he was content to let the retriever sleep beside him, its warm weight pressing into his side. The next morning, Hunter was pouring coffee when a sharp knock rattled his front door. He frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Setting down his mug, he crossed the room and pulled the door open only to be met with a breathless, wide-eyed woman standing in the hallway. She was drenched from the rain, her dark brown hair clinging to her face, her blue sweater soaked through. But it was her expression that caught him off guard, pure desperation, barely contained. And then he noticed the piece of paper clutched in her hands. A flyer. A flyer with a picture of the golden retriever sleeping on his couch. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, pressing a hand over her heart. "You have him." Hunter blinked. "You're his owner?" She nodded quickly, stepping forward like she was ready to push past him. "I've been looking everywhere. Can I see him?" Hunter hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Yeah, of course. Come in." The woman didn't waste a second, rushing past him as her eyes swept the room until they landed on the retriever, who had just woken up and was now wagging his tail excitedly. "Charlie," she choked out, dropping to her knees as the dog bolted toward her, launching itself into her arms. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur as her shoulders shook with relief. "Oh, baby, I thought I lost you forever." Hunter watched, something tightening in his chest. He had spent less than a day with the dog, but seeing the raw emotion on her face, he knew just how much this dog meant to her. After a long moment, she pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes before looking up at him. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice still shaky. He ran off when I opened the door for a delivery and then he just disappeared. I've been searching all night." Hunter nodded. "I found him in the rain. He looked lost, so I brought him back here." Her face softened, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You have no idea how much this means to me." "Thank you." Hunter scratched the back of his neck, suddenly feeling a little awkward under her gaze. "It's no problem. He's a great dog." She smiled then, and it hit him like a punch to the chest. "I'm Hadley." Hunter exhaled a quiet chuckle. "Hunter." Hadley glanced down at Charlie, who was still leaning against her like he never wanted to let go. "I should probably get him home," she murmured. "But could I get your number? Just in case." Hunter raised an eyebrow. "In case." She bit her lip, looking slightly embarrassed. "I don't know. In case I need another dog hero." Hunter huffed a quiet laugh, reaching for his phone. "Yeah, all right." As she typed in her number, Charlie nudged his leg, looking up at him with those same trusting brown eyes. Hunter had the strangest feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd be seeing either of them. Hunter didn't expect to hear from Hadley again so soon, but 2 days after she had come to retrieve Charlie, his phone rang with her name flashing across the screen. He hesitated only a second before answering. "Hey," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. There was a pause, then a quiet, sheepish laugh. "I swear I'm not calling with another dog emergency." Hunter huffed a quiet laugh of his own. "Good to know. What's up?" "Well," she hesitated, then let out a breath. "I just wanted to say thank you again. For everything. You didn't have to take him in, and I know I already said it, but I really appreciated it." Hunter glanced out his window, watching the city move below him. You don't have to thank me. He's a good dog. He is, Hadley agreed. A pause. Then I was wondering, would you want to meet up for coffee? As a thank you? No pressure, of course, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to ask. Hunter wasn't sure what made him say yes. Maybe it was the warmth in her voice or the fact that he had thought about her more than he cared to admit since she had walked out of his apartment. Either way, he found himself agreeing, and 20 minutes later, he was stepping into a small cafe tucked into the corner of a quiet street. Hadley was already there, sitting near the window with a cup in front of her. She looked up as he approached, a small, relieved smile crossing her face. Hey, she greeted. Hey, Hunter replied, settling into the seat across from her. She studied him for a second before tilting her head. So, do you frequently rescue lost animals, or was Charlie the exception? Hunter gave a soft chuckle. First time, actually. Well, you did a great job, she said warmly. Charlie's been sticking to me like glue ever since I brought him home. I think he's afraid I'll lose him again. Hunter nodded. Makes sense. He was pretty shaken up when I found him. Hadley's expression softened. I hated not knowing where he was. He's been with me through so much. Hunter could hear the weight in her words. How long have you had him? 3 years. She ran a finger along the rim of her cup. I got him after my dad passed away. I was a mess, and my mom thought a dog might help me through it. She was right. Hunter's chest tightened slightly. I'm sorry about your dad. She gave a small nod, her gaze dropping to her hands. It was sudden. One of those things you never think will happen until it does. Hunter understood loss. He didn't say it, but he let the silence stretch between them in quiet understanding. Hadley exhaled and straightened. Anyway, not to make this whole conversation depressing, Hunter gave her a half smile. I don't mind. She studied him for a moment, then tilted her head. What about you? Any pets? Not at the moment, he admitted. Grew up with dogs, though. Always figured I'd get one eventually. Hadley grinned. Well, if you ever need a dog fix, Charlie would love to see you again. He really took to you. Hunter didn't know what possessed him to say it, but the words came out before he could stop them. Maybe I wouldn't mind seeing him again either. Hadley's smile faltered just for a second before returning with a warmth that made something shift in his chest. That can definitely be arranged. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easier than Hunter expected. Hadley was easy to be around, her laughter soft and genuine, her presence grounding in a way he hadn't realized he needed. By the time they walked out of the cafe, the sun had started to set, casting the city in a golden glow. Hadley glanced up at him as they reached the sidewalk. I'm really glad you said yes to this. Hunter met her gaze. Me too. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. This is for you. Hunter frowned, taking it. What is it? A thank you, she said simply. No arguing. Hunter opened the envelope, expecting a gift card or something simple. But inside was a handwritten note, neat and thoughtful, with a small photo of Charlie attached. Thank you for keeping him safe. Hunter looked up, something unreadable in his expression. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. Hadley smiled. I'll see you around, Hunter. And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing on the sidewalk, the note still in his hands. Hunter had the strangest feeling that this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Hunter didn't expect to see Hadley again so soon, but life had a way of surprising him. It started with a knock at his door late one evening. He had just finished washing the dishes, the quiet hum of the city filtering through his open window when the sound startled him. He wasn't expecting company. When he pulled the door open, Hadley stood there, looking slightly embarrassed but determined. Charlie sat beside her, his tail wagging furiously. I know this is kind of out of nowhere, she admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But I need a favor. Hunter raised an eyebrow. A favor? She exhaled, nodding. It's a little last minute, and I totally understand if you can't, but my mom had an emergency and needs me to come over for the night. The problem is, Charlie hates being alone. I was wondering, would you mind watching him until tomorrow? Hunter glanced down at the retriever, who was now leaning against his leg like they were already best friends. A slow warmth spread through his chest. I can do that, he said without hesitation. Hadley's shoulders sagged with relief. Really? Are you sure? He gave a small shrug. Yeah. We got along pretty well last time, didn't we, buddy? He reached down, scratching Charlie behind the ears, earning a happy huff from the dog. Hadley beamed. You're seriously saving me right now. I'll be back in the morning, I promise. Hunter stepped aside, letting Charlie trot inside like he lived there. As Hadley handed over his leash and a small bag of supplies, their fingers brushed just for a second. Neither of them acknowledged it, but something unspoken lingered in the air. She hesitated in the doorway. "Thank you again." Hunter met her gaze. "Anytime." She lingered for a moment longer before finally pulling away, disappearing down the hall. Hunter closed the door, turning to find Charlie already sprawled out on the floor like he belonged there. "Guess it's just us tonight, huh?" Charlie thumped his tail against the hardwood in response. The night passed easily. Charlie followed Hunter from room to room, curling up at his feet when he sat on the couch, watching him with those warm brown eyes like he understood everything. Hunter hadn't realized how much he missed having company like this. By the time morning rolled around, he found himself reluctant to give Charlie back. But when another knock sounded at his door, signaling Hadley's return, he pushed the feeling aside and opened it. Hadley looked exhausted but relieved. "Hey!" Hunter stepped back, letting her in. Charlie immediately perked up, bounding toward her, his excitement evident. Hadley crouched to greet him, running her fingers through his fur. "Did you behave?" she cooed. Hunter folded his arms, leaning against the counter. He was perfect, made himself right at home. She glanced up at him, smiling. "I had a feeling he would." Something about the way she said it made Hunter's stomach tighten. Hadley straightened, brushing her hands off on her jeans. "I owe you big time." "You don't owe me anything," he said easily. She studied him for a second before tilting her head. "Well, how about breakfast? My treat." Hunter didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah," he said, grabbing his keys. "I'd like that." And as they stepped out together, Charlie trotting happily between them, Hunter had the strangest feeling that this wasn't just about a lost dog anymore. Hunter hadn't expected breakfast with Hadley to turn into something that felt natural, like they'd done it 100 times before. They had ended up at a small diner tucked between a bookstore and a florist, the kind of place with handwritten menus and coffee that smelled stronger than any alarm clock. Hadley had ordered pancakes, piling them high with syrup, while Hunter stuck to eggs and toast. Charlie, ever the opportunist, sat between them on the outdoor patio, his head resting on Hadley's lap, waiting for scraps. She had laughed when Hunter had pointed out that Charlie clearly had her wrapped around his paw. "I can't help it," she had said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "He knows how to play me." Hunter had only watched her, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest. Now, as they walked side by side down the quiet street, Charlie trotting happily between them, Hadley tilted her head toward him. "You know," she mused, "I never actually asked what you do for a living." Hunter slid his hands into his pockets. "I work in renovations, mostly home remodels." Hadley's brows lifted slightly. "That explains why you look like you could lift an entire couch by yourself." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Perks of the job." She studied him for a moment. "Do you like it?" Hunter thought for a second before nodding. "Yeah. There's something satisfying about taking something old, something broken, and making it solid again." Hadley's expression softened, like she understood that in a way that went beyond words. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments before she spoke again. "I actually work at a vet clinic," she admitted. "I guess I never mentioned that." Hunter glanced at her. "Makes sense, considering how much you love Charlie." She smiled. "Yeah, I guess so. I've always loved animals. My dad used to bring home strays all the time when I was a kid. Guess I got it from him." There was something wistful in her voice, something careful. Hunter didn't push. Instead, he said, "Do you ever want more pets?" "Oh, absolutely," she said without hesitation. "But Charlie's a little possessive. I think he likes being the only one." Hunter glanced down at the golden retriever, who was now walking close enough that his fur brushed both their legs. "Yeah," he murmured. "I can see that." Hadley stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. Hunter frowned slightly. "For what?" She exhaled, shifting on her feet. "For just being this kind of person. You didn't have to take Charlie in that night. You didn't have to watch him for me or agree to breakfast or even walk with me now. But you did." Hunter didn't know what to say to that. So he just looked at her, at the way sunlight caught the flecks of gold in her eyes, at the way she stood just close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. And then, without thinking, he reached out. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. Hadley sucked in a quiet breath. The world seemed to slow. Hunter didn't step back. Hadley didn't move away. Charlie let out a small huff, breaking whatever moment had settled between them, and Hadley let out a soft, breathy laugh. "I should probably get him home," she murmured. Hunter nodded, but the space between them still felt charged, like something had shifted and neither of them wanted to acknowledge it just yet. Hadley hesitated, then said, "I'll see you soon?" Hunter met her gaze. "Yeah," he said, voice steady. "You will." And as she walked away, Charlie bounding at her side, Hunter already knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Hunter wasn't sure when it had stopped being about Charlie and started being about Hadley. Maybe it was the way she always seemed to show up in his life at just the right moments, filling the quiet spaces he hadn't even realized were empty. Or maybe it was the way she really listened when he spoke, like she was piecing together every part of him without judgment. Either way, it had happened. And now, standing in his kitchen with her leaning against the counter, Charlie sprawled at their feet. Hunter knew there was no going back. Hadley tapped her fingers against her coffee mug. Her lips pursed in thought. "Okay. Serious question." Hunter raised an eyebrow. "All right. If you could only eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?" Hunter huffed a quiet laugh. "That's your serious question?" She grinned. "It's important. It says a lot about a person." He leaned back against the opposite counter, considering. "Probably something simple. A good steak, maybe." Hadley scrunched her nose. "Predictable." Hunter tilted his head. "And yours?" "Breakfast for dinner," she said without hesitation. "Pancakes, eggs, bacon." "The works." Hunter shook his head. "That's basically cheating. That's multiple things." She crossed her arms. "No, it's a meal. A delicious, perfect meal." Hunter chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll allow it." Hadley nudged his arm with her elbow. "Generous of you." The moment stretched, something unspoken settling between them. Hadley averted her gaze, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "I have a confession." Hunter straightened slightly. "Yeah?" She exhaled, setting her mug down. "I didn't just come over to debate hypothetical meals." Hunter waited. Hadley ran a hand through her hair, suddenly looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "My mom's moving. She sold the house." Hunter absorbed the information, watching the way her shoulders tensed as she said it. "That's a big change." She nodded. "I mean, it makes sense. It's too big for her now, and she wants something smaller, easier. But, I don't know. That house was home." Hunter understood. More than she probably realized. "Things change," he said carefully. "Doesn't mean they stop mattering." Hadley smiled faintly. "Yeah, I just wasn't expecting it to hit me like this." Hunter studied her, then made a decision. "Come with me." Hadley blinked. "What?" He set his own mug down, nodding toward the door. "Come on. Trust me." She hesitated only a second before nodding. "Okay." Charlie perked up as they moved, trotting after them as Hunter led her outside. He didn't tell her where they were going, just walked beside her through the city streets until they reached a quiet neighborhood lined with old houses, their porches wide, their roofs slightly slanted with age. Hadley looked around, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Where are we?" Hunter stopped in front of a small, weathered house with a faded blue door. "This was my home." Hadley turned to face him fully. He glanced at the house, something distant in his expression. "I haven't lived here in years. My parents sold it when they moved, but I still walk by sometimes." Hadley was quiet, waiting. Hunter exhaled. "Home isn't just a place. It's the people who made it feel that way. And wherever you go, you take that with you." Hadley stared at him, something unreadable in her gaze. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and steady. He looked down at their joined hands, his pulse quickening. Hadley squeezed gently. "You're right." Hunter swallowed, his grip tightening in response. Charlie let out a soft huff, breaking the moment, and Hadley laughed quietly. "We should probably head back," she murmured. Hunter nodded, but neither of them let go. As they walked, fingers still intertwined, Hunter knew there was no going back from this. Hunter never thought a single moment could change everything, but standing there with Hadley's hand in his, he knew this was different. This wasn't fleeting, wasn't something temporary. It had weight, real and undeniable. They walked back in silence, the quiet hum of the city around them, but neither of them let go. Every few steps, Hadley's fingers would tighten just slightly as if testing the reality of it, and Hunter would respond in kind silent reassurance, quiet understanding. When they reached her building, Hadley hesitated at the doorway, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. Charlie sat beside her, watching them with an almost knowing patience. "I don't want to go inside just yet," she admitted softly. Hunter's chest tightened. "Then don't." She exhaled a small laugh, but it wasn't amusement, it was something else, something heavier. "What are we doing, Hunter?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up, his fingers brushing against her jaw, tilting her face toward his. "Something that feels a hell of a lot like falling," he murmured. Hadley's breath stilled. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the space between them charged with something too big to name. Then, slowly, she leaned in, her forehead resting lightly against his. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. Hunter closed his eyes for a brief second, breathing her in. "Me neither." Her hands slid up his arms, tentative but sure, anchoring herself to him. "But I don't want to stop." Hunter's pulse roared in his ears. "Then don't." And then, finally, mercifully, she kissed him. It wasn't rushed or urgent. It wasn't desperate or fleeting. It was steady, like something they had been building toward from the very first moment. Her lips were soft, warm, and she kissed him like she had already made up her mind, like there was no turning back. Hunter responded in kind, his hands framing her face as he deepened it just slightly, savoring the way she melted into him. The world around them faded, just Hunter, Hadley, and the quiet certainty that this was exactly where they were supposed to be. When they finally pulled apart, Hadley's eyes were bright, her breath unsteady, but she didn't back away. "Stay for a little while?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hunter didn't hesitate. "Yeah." They stepped inside, Charlie trotting ahead as though he had somehow orchestrated this whole thing. Hadley led him to the couch, curling up beside him, her legs tucked beneath her. Hunter draped his arm along the backrest, letting his fingers ghost over her shoulder. It was easy, effortless in a way that should have scared him but didn't. "I don't know why I trust this so much," Hadley admitted, staring down at her hands. Hunter tilted his head. "Because it's real." She looked up at him then, and whatever she saw in his face must have been enough, because she exhaled, her shoulders losing some of their tension. "I've been waiting for something to feel like home again," she murmured. "And I think I just found it." Hunter's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "Me too." Hadley leaned into him, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly right. There were no doubts, no second guessing. Just this, just them. And it was enough.